Well, there are a few faint glimmers of hope in the looming U.S. budget deadline standoff, both in Congress and at the White House. President Barack Obama says he would accept a short-term increase in the nation's borrowing authority to avoid a default. And Republican Senator, that's Rob Portman, is said to be floating a plan to cut federal spending and reform the tax code as part of a deal to reopen government agencies and, of course, raise the government's debt ceiling. But nothing concrete has changed on the 8-day-long partial federal shutdown. Now, to get an insight into the U.S. partial government shutdown, we are joined live from our Brookings studio by Dr. Barry Bosworth, a senior fellow in the economic studies and the Robert V. Russo Chair in the International Economics at the Brookings Institution in Washington. Good afternoon, Dr. Bosworth.
Good afternoon.
Can you give us an understanding into the partial government shutdown and what this means to Africa and emerging economies?
I think the budget shutdown itself has a very small effect because only a small portion of the total budget activities are actually being shut down, and they're in the process of making exceptions to that. So the current budget shutdown, it affects some workers here in Washington, D.C., and if it goes on for several weeks, it will be more and more of a problem for companies that do business with the government. But in the short run, it's not that serious. It's just kind of stupid.
All right. In a way, it does seem like politics in the U.S. has polarized the running of the country, and the Republicans are now using the budget to frustrate President Obama's health reforms.
That's exactly right. It's an extraordinary dysfunctional government at the present time because the American public are so deeply divided on these issues. And so they keep electing people of very strong preferences to the Congress. They come here to Washington. And then, unlike the past, where you thought politicians wanted to compromise and work together, this is a group of people that do not believe in compromise. They believe in ultimatums, and they refuse to change. And until their constituents suffer deep pain as a consequence of this, nothing will happen.
Constituents, of course, suffering deep pain. What is all this toing and froing costing the voters or taxpayers at this point?
I think they've heard this so much before, and it's happened before, that there's a tendency to discount it, think it's just business as usual. They blame it on Washington rather than their own representative. And so I don't think it amounts to much publicly up until they hit the debt ceiling. So the government shutdown over the budget is much different than the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling would have a big impact, and I think it would have a big international impact as well as domestic. But that's a couple of weeks away yet.
How likely is it, Doctor, that President Barack Obama will go ahead and accept a short-term increase in the nation's borrowing authority to avoid a default?
I think it's possible, but it solves absolutely nothing. The real cost to the U.S. economy is this continual bickering and uncertainty that goes on week after week. And so agreeing for some short-term agreement that then expires again a few weeks later, I don't see that solves anything. They just cannot afford to keep arguing over this issue endlessly. They go over and over the same issues. There needs to be some more permanent or more like a one-year agreement, which I think is possible. They may decide to shut down the government again next year just before the election, and then they can let the voters decide. Short term now, I don't think solves anything.
Thank you, Dr. Barry Bosworth, President.